Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Transforming Healthcare, Regenerative AI, and Knowledge Graphs. My name is Amanda, and I am part of the virtual events team here at Neo4j. I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Alex Jarash, Technical Consultant, Pharma and Life Sciences at Neo4j. We are super excited to have you all with us today. Just a quick note about questions before we get started. We invite you to submit any questions you have throughout the session using the Questions tab located at the top of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of today's presentation. And if we don't get to them all, someone on the Neo4j events team will reach out to you directly, or you can always send an email to webinar@neo4j.com and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Alex.
All right, thanks, Amanda, and welcome to today's seminar. Today we speak about two disruptive technologies. One is knowledge graphs, or Neo4j. The second is what everybody knows is generative AI, or large language models. And we focus here a little bit on the healthcare system of pharma and life sciences. And what I'm basically covering in the next half an hour, 35 minutes, is on the left side, the database, so the graph database, and we talk about a native graph database with transactional workload. And on the right-hand side, on top of the database, we have so-called graph analytics or machine learning applications that we can run on the graphs to identify global patterns in our network. I don't want to go too much into this detail on the right side. Just keep that in mind that we not only have a graph database as a product, but also graph data science. Why are we doing graphs? For me, one of the most crucial points is to provide solutions for any kind of drug that gets on the market, so that we can cure any of the widespread diseases like cancer or diabetes or Alzheimer's. And what kept me motivated all the time is the picture that you see here, which is a HER2-negative breast cancer patient. And you see that here in the small red node represents the patient, obviously a female one, which is connected to all these yellow nodes here that are in kind of a snake-like structure, or that are all connected by next relationships. And these are representing the visits or the encounters that the patient undergoes. And at each and every visit, which you see here, the doctors acquire different kinds of data, which is very heterogeneous data. Lots of them are very unstructured. And you see this needs to have a loose or a no data schema at all. And if you want to deduce any insights from that, obviously you need some algorithms covering that. And this is, as I said, the graph data science part of it. So this is what keeps me motivated every day. Basically, graphs are everywhere in our business, right? If we think about on the left side here, these small molecules, these are graphs, right? If the nodes represent atoms and the atom bonds are representing relationships. On the right side, you've seen the molecular pathways here, where you see enzymes catalyzing specific reactions with and without cofactors. So you also see this as a graph, right? I think one of the most prominent examples here on a higher level, not molecular level, is our human brain, which is kind of a connected cells that work with each other. And so graphs are basically everywhere, right? And usually the business questions that the customers have are the following. In most of the cases, we have highly complex and highly connected data, as I said, very heterogeneous. And the companies or organizations, they just want to manage the complexity of the data, and they want to represent the connectiveness natively in the database. Obviously, they want to derive even more insights or value from the data, right? So they have already some use cases that they can answer with the data, but there's even more that you can answer or have more insights if you have the access to explicit relationships. If we think about the late stage, or rather supply chain, which we have if we're manufacturing those drugs, the use case is rather supply chain. I would rather use the term supply network, because it's a highly complex connected thing, like a network that you try to depict here. And in the end, everybody wants to mitigate risk, right? We want to identify bottlenecks. We want to see alternative routes for trucks that can move from A to B, or we want to have alternative routes in chemical synthesis. So this is kind of the supply chain use case. And I think we all agree that everybody, each and every company, wants to improve the time to market, right? We want to provide the drugs and the treatments way earlier than we've done before. And this is where innovative companies and innovative technologies come into place, like graph technology. So what Neo4j is, we are a native graph technology company, and what we have as an underlying scheme, or let's say the basic thing, is the labeled property graph, which is, and if you think back to your biology book in class 10 or so, you would probably remember that you have a gene as a circle represented that is coding a protein, and the protein performs a specific reaction or specific function in the cell, right? So probably you remember this, and this is exactly what a graph is. We have nodes that these circles represent here. These are representing entities, and these entities are connected by relationships, here these arrows, and we can give them names, both the node label here, for example, gene, and also the relationship label called codes. As I said, we have a loose data schema, meaning that not all the instance data from the same type as of gene or protein, that they necessarily have to have the same variables or properties. And this is what you see here on the lower end. So for example, here for this gene, we have a name property, which is a string ADH. We have here for this protein, we have a name property, we have an identifier from Unicron, we have an EC number for enzymatic reactions, we have a description, and so on and so forth. We can also put properties on the relationship types here, like something like a confidence level. How confident are you that this gene is coding protein? Or how confident are you that, I don't know, a certain reaction is successful? So this is the underlying schema, very easy to understand and very easy to present that to your business user. And that brings me to the next point. So Neo4j, or graph technology, and the data model for the database is the same data model for the database developer as well as for the business user. And here we have one example from drug discovery, or from very early R&D in pharma. You recognize again here the genes that are coding RNAs, the RNAs are coding proteins. Proteins interact with other proteins, right? So we can easily have the protein-protein interaction covered by this. We have proteins that are connected to terms like gene ontology terms. So ontologies can be easily integrated. I will come back to that later. Proteins are sometimes drug targets for diseases, right? And we target these diseases with certain drugs. The drugs are investigated in clinical trials. You get the point, right? Very, very easy to understand from a business user, but also it's the same on the developer level. As a second example, from clinical trial data or from patient journey, rather patient-related data model, we have a patient that has an encounter here. The encounters are connected in a time manner, so that you have the next and the next and the next encounter. At some of the encounters, we have diagnosed clinical conditions, we have drug prescribed, things that are measured in the laboratory called observations. We have devices like MRT scan, CT scan, and stuff like that. Procedures like a surgery, providers, the doctors, organizations, the hospitals, and so on and so forth. So very easy to understand. The problem is, if the business user draws these data schemas, in the last 20 to 30 years, we were really good in transforming that into relational database systems, or in tables or in rows, which are legacy systems, and they cannot keep up with the complexity and the connectiveness of the data that we have today. Document databases don't handle relationships at all, so it is kind of clunky to use these legacy systems. They have a reason, and they have good reasons for many use cases, but for a lot of use cases in the pharma field, a graph database is well more suited than a relational database system. And this is where we meet graph again, right? So we want to represent data like in reality on entity resolution. We want to connect everything how it is in reality, and we try to unlock a deeper understanding when using these relationships or connections between the data objects. And this is where many people say, well, we don't talk about the graph database as a database. We rather talk about a storage or a data structure that is called knowledge graph. Basically, what it is you store things like knowledge, insights, data, raw data, instance data in a connected way, and you persist the knowledge, in form of a graph. And this is what you see. So whenever we talk about graph databases or knowledge graphs, it's not a chart, it's not a bar chart, it's not a plot, it's not a time series, it's rather like nodes and relationships. All right, so what is a knowledge graph? A knowledge graph is a structured representation of facts consisting of entities, relationships, and semantic descriptions. And that brings me to the next level. Well, you have your data here in a knowledge graph on the lower side here. What we can also put into the same database as a second layer is a semantic description of your entities and the relationships between the entities. And as I said, I will come back to these ontologies or terminologies in our example session. When we take a step back and have a look what kind of companies we work with in the drug life cycle, and I only keep here the drug life cycle use cases here. What you see is the very early R&D with target discovery, hit generation and lead optimization. Then we have animal model data. We kind of enter into clinical trials on human data, and then we come to approval stage, supply chain manufacturing, and post-approval, which can be drug repurposing, which can be FDA adverse event reporting, something like that. And what you see here in the slide is that basically, we have a lot of pharma companies that trust in Neo4j, right? And we have use cases throughout the drug life cycle. You see very prominent use cases here in target identification or target discovery, but we also see a lot of use in the supply chain as well as in clinical trials. Coming back to the knowledge graph, how do users get started with Neo4j? How do they start a project? How can you put knowledge into Neo4j? This is when we start from inside to outside. Usually what customers are doing is they integrate data from primary systems or any kind of public data, whatever you can get, and try to connect, like genes and proteins from UniProt or from Ensemble, molecular pathways, Reactome, stuff like that. PubMed is a big data source for crawling literature data, patent data, and you connect that all natively in the graph database. There's also an option to buy in licensed data sets, as from QIAGEN, for example. And in the end, all the customers want to do the same. They want to connect other external data that they can get from wherever. They want to infer some data based on that public data. But in the end, they also want to connect that to internal data, which is here the outer shell. And that can be everything, like an ontology or terminology, internal and external. That can be real-world evidence data. That can be clinical trial data, anything that you can think of, omics data, glycomics, proteomics, transcriptomics, can be data sets like open target, high throughput screening data, putting everything together in a big knowledge graph so that you can easily query and find things in a database, and you can create new insights out of your data. Speaking of ontologies, as I said, they are in the same database, so you can see that as following. So you have your instance data on the one hand side, and then you have kind of this hierarchical data representation of an ontology that can be external, maybe a second one which is internal, more specific to one or the other indication, can be also terminologies, internal, external. And what you can do is you can easily integrate those ontologies from RDF data using our Neosemantics plugin or RDF-lib extension. You can do cross mappings here. I will come to that back in our examples. And then you can build these relationships with the connections to your data, to the external data, which is connected to the ontology terms. Now, we are here today for talking about Gen AI, right, and large language models. And we now cover a little bit large language models and how Neo4j and large language models work so good together. Well, most of you probably know that ChatGPT is the most prominent example of that, although OpenAI is behind that. We also have that for other cloud vendors like Google or Amazon. And they basically share a lot of common features to a parrot, right? They learn from random sentences from random people, right? We take all the knowledge that we can get from the internet and put it into the large language model. Well, the large language model talks like a person, but doesn't really understand what it's saying, right? So there's no reasoning behind that. It occasionally speaks a lot of nonsense, and we will cover that. So we talk about hallucination. And the only difference between ChatGPT or OpenAI and a parrot is that the one is a very cute bird. So large language models lack from explicit domain understanding. They deal with words, but not with the meaning of it. They provide non-deterministic answers. So when you run the same question or the same query again, it could slightly be a different answer because it's a stochastic model. The answers emerge from a specific language, and they emerge from specific statistics. And they all lack the explainability. So we use that rather like a black box, right? And if we think about hallucination, this is a big issue for our industry because here we have to have facts and we have to have accurate results, and we have to have explainability. If we think about knowledge graphs, they have on the other side instantiate data. So we have entity resolution data where we have the knowledge connected, very precise, very much detail if we keep all the properties there. We deal with concepts and meaning like semantics if we include ontologies. We provide a deterministic answer because you can create this query, and if you run the same query again, it will create the same result. The answers are based on the concepts in the database, right? So you have that kind of explainability. And this is very much understandable for human beings to traverse the graph and kind of explain that. But the problem is it doesn't really scale, and the interface between the database and the user is often a query language that is not so easy to use for business users or non-techie persons. So how can we take advantage of this Gen AI while overcoming the challenges of hallucination? And again, this is why we have knowledge graphs, and I will explain you a little bit. When we combine them, we can improve the accuracy of the answers of the LLM. We can deploy that with confidence, and we can unlock new innovation for each and every company. So we bring everything together. We bring, from the knowledge graph perspective, we bring facts, explicit relationships, the explainability. And then from the LLM or from OpenAI, of Gen AI, we bring the words, the language understanding, making the implicit explicit, and make that transparent to the user. So some of the use cases are already in place. I will show you two examples here, like retrieval augmented generation, as well as natural language querying, which is a little bit related to natural language processing or named entity recognition. And I will show an example here how to use unstructured text and deconstruct it and put that automatically in a knowledge graph. If we think about the LLM plus the graph database, how can we make use of that? And we start from the left-hand side. So we have structured data coming from databases, Snowflake, Databricks, SQL, Mongo, whatever you have. Also documents like JSON format or CSV files, XML files. We can deal with any RDF data, Turtle, XML, OBO. We can even use unstructured data like texts or videos or images like from MRT scans and stuff, and use that as an input for the large language model or for the Gen AI model in order to recognize things and extract information from that and automatically ingest that into the graph database. Okay? Then we can do like visualizations and interactive explorations in the cloud or on premise. And what we can also do, as I said in the beginning, we can use graph algorithms to get new insights to predict things like identify communities of patients or identify the bottlenecks in your supply chain network and so on. So we can use graph data science. And as I said, we can also use this large language model as an interface between the business user that is non-techie, that asks a normal language question, that gets translated into a cipher query to the database, is performed on the database and represents the result back to the user. So we can use that from both sides, the backend side on the left side and the front end side on the right side. So a little bit about accuracy and how we improve the accuracy by using a knowledge graph with an LLM. So what we do is we have a user here that asks a question. I don't know, list me all the patients with type 2 diabetes and who have seen Dr. XYZ. This is what you represent the large language model, and then the large language model translates that into a cipher query. The query gets performed on the database here on our knowledge graphs, retrieves the information, and returns back like this little local graph here as an output. And what you see here, maybe this little bigger dot here is your result, and what you get back is this kind of local neighborhood of all of this node here, representing the context of the data. So how could that look like? So when we ask a question, I don't know, to a database, and we get back your node is named AD. Okay, what is AD? Could be that AD here, this middle point, is representing alcohol dehydrogenase, which is an enzyme degrading alcohol, right? And we see that from the context, because probably the context is it's a protein, it's coded by a gene, it's coded by this and that RNAs, gets regulated, and so on and so forth. Could also be that we get a second result as AD back, where AD stands for Alzheimer's disease, which is a disease, right? Which is connected to, I don't know, patients that have Alzheimer's, right? And you see, you can explain the result of AD by its context. So that makes the accuracy much higher and reduces the kind of hallucinating effect from the large language model. We can deploy that with confidence. So what do we mean by that? If you think about your graph on the left side, where we have probably highly sensitive data as health diagnosis, I don't know, not so much problematic data for customer service like phone numbers from patient Bob. We, in our enterprise product, we ship role-based access control as well as value-based access control. So you can block access to different node labels here, even down to property level, to certain users of the database. So the doctor has access to the health diagnosis, while the customer service does not. Let's go to some examples here. First example is ingesting data into Neo4j using a large language model. And at this stage, I must say, live demos never work, so that's why I'm using here screenshots, but this is a Jupyter notebook that we can also share with you, and I'll walk you through the Jupyter notebook, show you some screenshots, and I hope you can trust that this is a live running example. What we have here is a case sheet from a doctor saying the patient was a 34-year-old man who presented blah, blah, blah. And we see here S100 protein, what else do we see? 4 centimeter sized mass. So we see things that can be identified like diagnoses or symptoms or properties of a patient. And this is what we want to tell the large language model. Please do a named entity recognition and automatically ingest it into Neo4j. And this is basically what we do. We have that as a string property here. You see article text from one patient. And we give now the large language model a prompt here. And this is a little bit of an exercise of prompt engineering, where we say in natural language, as you can read here, from the case sheet for patient below, extract the following entities and relationship described and mentioned in the format. So what we want the LLM to recognize is a case, for example, as an entity, a person, symptom, disease. You see. What we also want to recognize is that a person is connected to a symptom via a relationship called has symptom. So the person has a symptom. We want to recognize maybe when this was, or the frequency, or the span of it. The person has a disease, so we try to identify things that are connected. And this is what we do. We run here the prompt on our text, and we push that to the OpenAI in this case. You can use that in all your cloud environments, even your own hosted LLMs like Hugging Face and so on. And how much it takes is like half a second to complete this task for named entity recognition. And the LLM gives you an output, and we said like the LLM should be, the output of the LLM should be a JSON format. So we see here we have a new label recognized, which is a person, which has an ID, which is person 1. You see, you remember like this patient was 34 years old, diseases, pulmonary tuberculosis, and so on. And we have this as an input for data ingestion into Neo4j. And this is what we have then in the database. So we have a person that has a disease. We recognize symptoms here, biological entities as symptoms. We have diagnoses recognized, and cases for showing the doctor. Second example, this is very new. We try to use ontology data and to cross-map ontologies if we don't have enough information to that. So what's behind that? Ontologies and terminologies, as you might know, they play a very, very important role in our industry, right? We have regulatory environment here, the FDA, the EMA in Europe. So they talk standards. If we want to exchange information with competitors, with partners, we have to talk the same language, or at least it helps a lot if we talk the same standard. Usually, these ontologies come in RDF triples or in Turtle, XML, and OBO. As I said, we have a plugin called Neo-Semantics or RDF-Lib, where we can use all the data formats and just ingest that into our Neo4j database. What we can then do is perform semantic search or similarity search based on that ontology. We can mix internal and external ontologies. And this is what you see here on the right side. We should use those ontologies and do cross mappings. So why should we do that? That can be that you say, okay, this is my internal terminology that I'm following. This is the external terminology. So what term is equivalent to what other term from the other ontology? You can also see that species overarching for species. You have something, an event or an ontology used from your animal model, and you want to deduce the information corresponding to the human system. So this is where this example comes into place. We can do this cross-mapping if we have cross-references in the data, so basically stored in the XML file or OBO files. And let me take one step back. This is what we have, for example, here between mesh terms and disease ontology, as well as to Wikidata. And we have those cross-references saying identifier 123 corresponds to identifier ABC in disease ontology and corresponds to XXX from mesh terms. So this is where a cross-mapping between ontologies really work well. And what we can easily do while data integration, we can just create explicit relationships in the database and then query in between. The problem is if we don't have cross-references, something like this, and I have 3 examples here on the left-hand side, very obvious one, human papillomavirus infection is the same from Wikidata, is the same like disease ontology, human papillomavirus infectious disease is the same like mesh ontology papillomavirus infection, right? Pretty obvious that we would say, okay, if this is the case, why is there no cross-reference from cyan to green? It gets more complicated if we are not experts in that field, and if we want to scale it up for thousands and hundred thousands of ontology terms, where we have cases like this here, and I cannot even pronounce this name correctly here. But you see, basically, the strings are not matching well with each other, so any kind of regular expression or string matching would fail, right? And this is where a Gen AI approach could help you by doing the following. We take the descriptions here and the labels, and we ask in this case it's an OpenAI call, given the two different disease names, tell me if they are the same, right? The first name is, and this is our variable 1, and the second name is variable 2. And then we kind of ingest that back into Neo4j. If the answer from the large language model is yes, we try to create here this new relationship called similar to ChatGPT or GPT. And then we give the explanation of the large language model stored as a property on the relationship. And this is how it looks like. So within seconds, we can predict new relationships between ontologies easily using a large language model. And we can give it even explanations here as this description. Yes, they are the same, is also known as blah, 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 is an infectious disease, and so on. So also very easy to make that transparent to the user. If you traverse this relationship here, it will tell you, okay, this is a prediction using in a large language model. And that brings me to the last point of the presentation, vector indexes in Neo4j. And this is quite a new feature. I think that was released in the end of August. So what are vector indexes? Basically, for machine learning, highly unstructured data or image data can be represented as a vector. So as a vector of floats or integers. And this vector can be stored in the graph database, representing the unstructured data. And what you can do then is very easily using your own ML stack or using graph data science algorithms to use those vectors for machine learning, basically representing your high complex data in form of a vector, sometimes reduced from the dimension. And if we think about the right-hand side of this large language model approach, where you have the business user that doesn't talk Cypher query language or Python or Java or whatever kind of query language or programming language, this is how the large language model would be the interface. You have your application where the user inputs a question. Well, this question gets translated into a vector, like an embedding vector, like this here, a huge vector, like, I don't know, 1,500 dimensions. And this vector is then compared for a similarity search in a vector index, saying, okay, if the two vectors are closer to each other, they are more alike to be the result for your query. And these vectors are stored in our vector index, and they represent basically the graph or the subgraph or the nodes of your knowledge graph. And then this is, so a vector lookup is very performant here. And those explicit relationships here that you have in the knowledge graphs gets also represented as an embedding vector, which gets translated into natural language, for example, to your natural language result. And one point here is that usually you would need a second vector database for that. Well, in Neo4j, we have already the vector index, and you don't necessarily need a vector database, a separate vector database where you have another I/O and lose performance. So we have that natively in our product. That brings me to the last use case, a little bit from patient journey here, which I see very often from many different customers. And there's a very, very nice presentation by Joe Romer by AstraZeneca. Have a look on YouTube on that, where they try to get more insights from real-world evidence data in order to learn more from the patients and from the outcome of the patients, in order to feed that back into the knowledge graph for the early R&D for the next level drug discovery. Obviously, I cannot show you any of AstraZeneca's data, but what I did is I used Synthia data, which is available in CSV, OMOP, or HS7 file format, and I created a publicly available database with 100,000 patients in this HS7 file format. And as I said, I integrated into Neo4j. And what you can do is basically traverse here from the patient, as I had it in the beginning here, the visits and the encounters of a specific patient or many patient groups and so on and so forth. And you can traverse that, you can visualize that. You can even use that here with our dashboarding functionality called Neo Dash You can investigate that interactively with our visualization called Neo4j Bloom. But again, we are here for Gen AI, right? Wouldn't it be cool also to have kind of this LLM interface to the data? So can we query the database with an LLM saying, list all the patients with encounters connected to condition diabetes? Or this is another one called Sherlock by Graphable. Please list the top 5 providers in my data set. Well, the answer is obviously yes, right? That's why we're here for. And I show you a little example here on this patient journey database that I have. And this is a third-party application called YWorks Data Explorer on top of that, representing our patients here as a little, I would rather say, square or like a PowerPoint slide with here the properties instead of having these kind of spheres for the data representation. And yeah, I have here one patient, and what I can do is ask a question here with this tool, even in speaking with my microphone here or just typing in, select the displayed patient and show all the connected encounters. And it takes some milliseconds to show me that this patient has 5 encounters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5 encounters. What you see here is that this encounter, the first one, has 0 incoming relationships, so only 25 outgoing relationships, 13 outgoing relationships, and so on and so forth. So we have more data which is connected to the encounters. And we can do that with the second query, saying, display all the providers and organizations, so the doctors in the hospital that are connected to these encounters. And boom, here we are. We have here the provider with an address here, a name. Obviously, that's a fake name because it's a synthetic data set. And we have an organization here, a hospital that sits somewhere. And we can spin that further. And this is now the last one, which is a live demo here as a video. We can go even here on a map where we have GPS coordinates. And you see that here on OpenStreetMap, where we can interactively zoom in and we can identify where do our data items sit here. And we can zoom that in. This is Boston area. We can have a magnifier here. You see the provider, the patient. They are quite close, right? They're, I don't know, like 20 miles away. You see the hospital is there. And if this is kind of your use case where you try to investigate what is the, I don't know, the average distance between the patient and the doctor, something like that, that could be a use case, or how many doctors does this and that patient see? This is what you can do interactively. And that brings me to the end already of our webinar here. I think as a little summary, I hope I could give you an introduction to how to create the knowledge graph by data ingestion using a large language model, also have role-based access control, and to do that on entity resolution. We use ontologies, metadata, or even graph data science to enrich our data, so to create new relationships, cross-references connected to metadata. We want to visualize that. We want to query the database, right? That's why we have a database. I showed you some visualizations. I showed you some interfaces, a large language model. And in the end, obviously, the long-term goal is to solve your business problem, right? And this is what you can do with us in the cloud or on-premise. And that brings me back from step number 4 to step number 1. Obviously, this is like an iterative approach. You try to use the insights that you deduced from your knowledge graph and feed that back into your knowledge graph for the second iteration. And that's what basically all the customers in the pharma space are doing, or basically in every industry. Yeah, so I hope that was informative. Thanks for sharing the time with me. And yeah, I'm happy to take questions, and I hope there are questions in the audience. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Thank you, Alex, for such a great presentation. It looks like we do have some time for a few questions today. Before we get to those, I did want to remind the audience that if they'd like to submit a question, they can do so by typing it into the questions tab at the top of your screen. Just as a reminder, if we don't get to all of the questions, someone on the Neo4j events team will reach out to you directly, or you can always send an email to webinar@neo4j.com and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. All right, so let's start on with some questions. Okay, this is a great first question. This person wants to know, is this vector index a separate vector database? Can I use this new vector index for my node embeddings that I generate with the GDS library?
All right. Two questions. So is the vector database a separate database? No. So the index comes already shipped with the database with Neo4j version 5.13, I guess. It's well documented in the internet, and you don't need a separate vector database for that. Second part of the question: can you use the GDS embeddings? And to remind the others, we can use the graph data science library to create embedding vectors, so also vectors from our data in the graph database to represent that as a vector, even in reduced dimensionality. And yes, you can index that for even more performant database queries based on this vector index. Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that great explanation. It was a two-part question. Okay, moving on. Here's another question. You showed OpenAI as LLM. Can I use my own private LLM?
Yes. Simple answer is yes. And obviously, a commercial company would never use ChatGPT as private people, right? So they would never reveal proprietary or confidential data, right? Because this gets into the training iteration for the next GPT, whatever kind of version. So you can use your own private LLM. You can even train your own LLM. And as I said, probably in the presentation, you can use that from any cloud provider like Amazon Bedrock or Google Bard.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Okay, looks like we have some time for a few more questions. Okay, here's another one. In one of your slides, you showed a dashboard. What can I display, and can I link that to an LLM?
Yes, very good question. And probably the person that mentioned this question probably saw something like that. What I showed you are nodes that are connected by relationships, right? And this is the one way of representing our data to the user, right? But we are also able to output tables or lists or yes and no or a number 42 from our database. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a node or nodes and relationships. We have connectors to Power BI, for example, to Tableau, but we also have a solution called Neo4j, which is an open source project in Neo4j, where you can create dashboards for your business user, and that runs as a like a Docker container or like a web server, and which has a connection to the database. And there is a new functionality where usually you can swap between the Cypher query language, where usually a database developer would write a Cypher query for the business user and then save that. But now you can also input English or any kind of other language that works with your large language model, and then connect that and configure that to your dashboard. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. It looks like we have time for one more question today. So this will be our last one. And this individual is asking, you showed some LLM examples for patient-related data. Are these examples from pharma R&D?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yes.
If I got it right.
You showed some LLM examples for patient-related data. Mm-hmm. Are these examples from pharma R&D?
Yes. So obviously not the data from the customers. This is like publicly available dummy data sets or like smaller published data sets. These are pharma related, yes. And as I said probably before, those insights that you derive from the LLM or from the data ingestion and from the analytics can be feed back into your knowledge graph for the second iteration and for the new machine learning round of your ML pipeline.
Awesome, thanks. All right. Well, I guess it's time to wrap up. So, Alex, thank you so much for being with us today. And for those in the audience, thank you for joining us today as well. I wish you all a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.